Okay, who's
We're
going?
live. We're rolling.
Is it your turn?
I think
It's
is.
the 15th edition renewal. 16th. It was the 15th renewal. That means the 16th edition of the Impact Narrative. It seems so recently that we're doing episode 15. That
It does.
I'm in a time warp.
I
And
was-
here we are. Yes, and come on, we'll do the stuff about Facebook and Twitter
Oh, yes.
and all that. Like us on
Yes, one
Twitter.
can like us on various platforms,
Yeah.
social media fora,
And it's best to say this before we start
so we
because
remember.
well, there's more chance that people would do that at the beginning before they've heard us than at the
yes,
end.
indeed.
Yeah.
So you can subscribe to our channel somewhere down there. You can do other things. You can follow our channel. You can like us on Twitter, on Facebook, on
Or you could
Instagram.
live a worthwhile life. That's the other option. But anyway,
yes, you can do all of those things, and it'd be great to have more engagement with what we're trying to do as an institute and as a narrative.
as an impact narrative.
Indeed, indeed. Mark, I was reminiscing of the days where we had our own radio show.
Oh dear, yes, that's a distant past. Why were you reminiscing about that, Simon?
It was a beautiful sunny afternoon yesterday, and I thought this reminds me of
Oh,
trekking over to the station, camping out inside,
yeah,
corrugated iron
talking
shed.
nonsense for 2 hours.
Indeed.
Interspersed.
2 hours of this, can you imagine?
Yeah, it's interspersed with music.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah, we used to have a kind of a format then. We used to do things in a logical order.
Did we?
Yeah, in those days, but now
I think
anarchy
you've invented
prevails.
memories, Mark.
Yeah, well, no, we used to have a written running order. Anyway,
we have a running order
but
in my mind.
today, unfortunately, that's all the levity we have time for because disturbing incidents yesterday in Gaza, and Simon, as somebody who knows a bit about these things,
Continue today across Israel-Palestine. Because today is the anniversary of the Nakba, the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, which is the anniversary of when 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So, a pretty serious topic, a very sensitive topic, and a topic that is heightened when we think about what's happened in Jerusalem in the past 24 hours. So, where do we start, Mark? Do we start back 70 years ago? Do we start with yesterday? Do we start with today?
I think we need to talk about yesterday more urgently because the other thing is obviously essential background, you might say, but we might run out of time.
Right, okay, so yesterday was the official opening of the new US Embassy in Jerusalem. This is going against decades of diplomatic convention, diplomatic protocol, and it was the culmination of President Trump's desire, his pre-presidential election desire to move the US Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Now this is a hugely seismic event. Obviously Jerusalem is a contested city for many. It's heralded as the site of the capital for Israelis, but also for Palestinians, for a future Palestinian state. But what diplomatic protocol has previously said is there will be no real embassy presence in Jerusalem. It will be in Tel Aviv. It will be on the beach in Tel Aviv, essentially, just removed. Very, very beautiful location. Well, the US Embassy was anyway. And what Mr. Trump said in the run-up to the election to try and garner support from a range of different constituencies, many of whom he also pleased with the Iran deal, or withdrawing from the Iran deal, was that he was going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In doing so, granting a huge amount of symbolic legitimacy to Mr. Netanyahu, to the State of Israel, to the State of Israel with Jerusalem as its eternal capital, and in doing so, having a negative impact on any future Palestinian claims to Jerusalem as a capital of the Palestinian state.
Yeah.
I think that is the very sensitive way of looking at it. But
Yeah, it could be that Mr. Trump thinks it would be more logical for Israel to have its capital. It could be that he's done this because he actually thinks it's the right thing to do rather than for tactical. I think we should point that out.
Oh, of course.
It's a remote possibility, but it still is a possibility.
Oh yeah, Jerusalem is the capital, the administrative capital of the Israeli state. The Knesset is there. The Knesset, which does actually wonderful lunches. Very good quality lunches.
You recommend it as
if one is there, yeah. And so there would be an argument for that, but that itself goes against this diplomatic convention of not prejudicing the one side over the other in peace talks.
Yeah.
Now, there's a hugely symbolic aspect to this, Mark. Obviously,
Right.
you've got a sensitive set of peace talks between two intractably different sides, and then in moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that is prejudicing any future peace talks,
Yeah.
seemingly meaning that a future Palestinian state could not have Jerusalem as its capital.
Yeah.
There are deep, serious future issues for this.
Yeah, well, I think what it really means, you're saying about peace talks, it really kind of rules out the possibility of peace talks, does it not? I mean, what it's done is, and I think this has been to an extent calculated by Mr. Trump, that it destroys the previously tenuous role of the US as an honest broker.
Well,
but then
there's
again,
all kinds of debate about whether it was ever an honest broker or not.
oh well, that's what I mean. That's why I use the word tenuous.
But yeah, there's the pretense of that now has gone.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
veneer
I mean,
of
under
control.
Obama, you could say that it was as close as the US could come to being an honest broker.
Yeah, I think
But it
so.
didn't broke very much, did it?
No, and
There wasn't
despite
much progress.
Despite the best efforts of Mr. Kerry, Mr. John Kerry, who ran up so many air miles, travelling around, trying to get some type of pressure on this. And yeah, I think that it's a worrying move with regard for peace talks, if indeed there can be any peace talks right now, because it seems to me that this is an intractable conflict. This is a frozen conflict. We have two sides that are deeply divided in and of themselves, and actually having any type of lasting peace is incredibly difficult, and Jerusalem was one of the sticking points of that. And now there is even more weight behind this idea that Jerusalem cannot be shared as a capital of two different states. And back in the early 1990s, we saw what happened when one Israeli leader tried to make peace with the Palestinians. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv
Right.
when he tried to reach out and make peace. So that just gives you a sense of how divided these different
And
communities
equally
are.
on the other side, that attempts to make peace on
course.
anything other than favourable terms would be very dangerous for
Yep.
any Palestinian leader.
Certainly, and what we're seeing overnight and yesterday and continuing today is this sense that there are popular protests, large-scale protests across Gaza, across the West Bank, with regard to this move. Now, the Gaza thing, I think, needs to be placed in context as well, and this is where the Nakba comes in, Mark.
Right, okay.
So, what Palestinians have been doing for the past 7 or 8 weeks is marching across Gaza to the security fence, to the prison wall, if you will, and they've been walking there is a great return march, signifying their return home after they were forced from their land in 1948, so it's a generational thing. And so as they were doing this, Israeli leaders were trying to frame it in certain ways. It was deemed to be a security threat, deemed to be a
Yes.
security issue, so many people in such close proximity to the Israeli border, and it erupted in violence. There have been instances where stability has been punctured, and there have been instances of violence across the past couple of weeks, but yesterday I believe 58 people were killed. Many more were wounded, injured, and I fear the death toll will rise. And that, I think, is a combination of 70 years of grievance, shaped by political history, shaped by the current context of life in Gaza, which is incredibly perilous, precarious, not a great deal of political optimism, not a great deal of economic or social hope,
No.
in spite of people trying to exert agency, in spite of external actors trying to get aid into Gaza. It's an incredibly difficult time. And so Mr. Trump's decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem was hugely...
Well, certainly the timing of the
Problematic.
move is just unbelievably crass, isn't it? I mean,
It
to
really
coincide with that 70-year anniversary.
which is today, I should add. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't-
yeah. But still, I mean, you look in your diary and you say days to avoid if you're going to do something controversial, and that anything within a day or two of a very emotive anniversary would seem to
politically
be
insensitive, I think, is...
Well, yeah, I think that would be slightly underplaying it.
Probably.
But,
I mean, it's
yeah.
just, it's shocking. There's 70 years of grievance. 70 years of debate on the international stage, violence, terrorism on both sides. But this is just a mistake. It's a huge mistake by the Trump administration.
Yeah. Well. I mean, it's a sign that there's only one constituency that he's interested in. He's not interested in the sensitivities of the Palestinian people, and even in fact of wider public opinion. Because I mean, I was going to put in my own little thing. I was very interested to see my favourite newspaper and yours, the Daily Mail. The headline today was "Bloodbath," and although it did talk about a mob of.
Right.
But even so, the coverage was quite. It certainly wasn't trying to engender sympathy for Israel. It wasn't following Mr. Trump's line that this was entirely the responsibility of of Hamas, basically of the protesters. And other newspapers have been more predictable, the Daily Telegraph, etc.
Right,
But I thought that was really quite interesting, because usually, and I said this last week, usually the right-wing British press, whether the People editorial line is informed or not, tends to think that for various reasons Israel has got to be, if in doubt, give the benefit of any doubt to Israel.
Israel has historically been in a tough neighbourhood, so doubt should be with.
That's it, but this time it was the other way round. That was my reading of it. Bloodbath is a highly emotive, so they chose deliberately to surprise many of their readers, and to, I suppose, to make the readers reverse their usual order of sympathies.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the language and the framing of events. I caught a snippet of it, and there was talk of snipers picking out.
Was this the Daily Mail thing? Or
I think it was a Mail.
Daily Mail,
Yeah.
but they put the victims were just basically executed by snipers. That's the impression you get from.
And this was a hugely popular protest movement in Gaza. This idea of a symbolic return home, the Great Return March, marching back to land that was theirs and had been there in their families for generations, returning home.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, that's a disputed thing, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course, but this is a.
When you say 70 years, it's the thing that displacements, and 70 years is obviously only a few years fewer than the memories of the Holocaust.
Exactly.
Where obviously Jewish people were displanted and supplanted from their homes in Europe. So,
and that's the problem, I think, with not the problem, but this is one of the issues that anyone who is engaging in debate on Israel, on Palestine, on security issues, has to engage with so many traumas, so many normative complexities, and that yes, there is a great deal of emotion running, there is a great deal of sympathy for catastrophe and abhorrent behaviour of all types of people, but violence begets violence, unfortunately, and it's not a positive way in looking at things.
No.
But what we see, if we look at instances in and of themselves, we can be critical of particular acts. And yesterday there was a set of acts that require serious criticism.
Well, more than that, really. I mean, it's abhorrent, and I mean, it's not conducive to a civilised society. It's the kind of thing that the crimes committed, like Amritsar massacre, whatever, the crimes that the British government is now apologising for at every opportunity, and one might say rightly so, although the apology coming from Theresa May or David Cameron is a bit empty, given that the events are so long ago. But you know, it's similar to events which we feel ashamed of now in Britain, or at least the people who know what really happened feel ashamed of. And it's interesting, the British government has not been loud in its condemnation, not that I've noticed anyway.
No, I've not. Obviously, neither of us have heard what happened at the. I was going to say the dispatch bunch, but that's not today. That's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow, and again,
which tells how confused I am about days.
No, quite understandable. Anyway, so what do you think? I mean, obviously, this we're going to talk about Iran tomorrow with the Richardson Institute
which
event
is on a Wednesday.
Yes, indeed, and but obviously that's the other context for this. That Mr. Trump and the Middle East, the North Korean story bubbles along in the background, but before this latest issue, it was very much about Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear deal with Iran. Is it possible, Simon, I just put forward a hypothesis, that we've got here a situation where Mr. Trump feels that he's on a roll anyway. He wasn't going to row back from the embassy idea anyway, but the Iran deal, he's taking an extremely hard line, and he's in doing so emboldening the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu. And could it not be that there's some elements within the Israeli armed forces and the senior politicians, some kind of feeling that this is a time when, if they're going to do things which the world holds to be abhorrent, they're at least certain of the backing of Mr. Trump, and therefore now is the time to basically show strong arm tactics, maybe take preemptive actions elsewhere in the region.
Quite possibly. I think that Mr. Netanyahu will count on Mr. Trump's support for the coming 2 years.
Well, so it's carte blanche, isn't it? Really,
for the next 2 years, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Israelis are concerned about that exactly. I think what their calculations will be concerned with is, does Iran pose a serious existential threat to us now? Will Iran pose a greater threat in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 2 years' time?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, then they will think carefully and strategically about what is the best course of action. Is it to do something ourselves, to engage in preemptive strikes like we talked about last week? Or is it to try and create an atmosphere that changes the dynamics of play, that gets someone else to do the dirty work for them?
Right. And that could well be the United States, you think?
Well,
but the thing is, in amongst all this, Iran doesn't seem to be. He's said a few things in response to Mr. Trump, but it hasn't really done anything provocative necessarily.
No, it certainly hasn't. I think the Iranians are keen to keep the deal.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
Iranians want this deal to hold. They want to be part of the international community. They don't want the sanctions to be back on their state. American sanctions will, but if there's a way around that to get European leaders to keep the deal, or to find a new type of deal, I think many in Iran would be happy to take that. And yeah, I think this is obviously something that will play into the Iranian regime's hands, given that Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu appear to have just thrown off all forms of diplomatic protocol and convention in moving the embassy. So it's more ammunition, if you will.
Yeah, but I mean, so many powers around the world are anxious to remain on at least amicable terms with Mr. Trump.
Sure.
And so again, you know, Mr. Trump has got a license to shoot from the hip, and he's giving the same license to. Do you not think there's a danger then that instead of somebody else doing the dirty work for Israel, that this is a time when Israel is going to be preemptive and proactive generally?
Potentially, but I think what we've seen in the past is that when Israel has been preemptive, it's done it because it was scared, it was worried, it was pushed into a corner. Right now, things seem to be lining up quite nicely.
Well, yeah, but then again, if this deal collapses, that means that Iran has the freedom to.
But the Israelis wanted the deal to collapse.
But they wanted, but then
I think they are banking on the economic sanctions biting even further, and having a domestic set of repercussions. I think that's one of the thoughts of people in Israel. But
that's very strange. I mean, I'm sure you're right. You're far better informed than me, but surely that would be the kind of situation where if living standards fell in Iran, that the regime that's currently in place would find it very hard to remain in power, and that it could easily be replaced by a more hawkish. It would seem a bit odd to.
I'm not sure you can get much more hawkish than the current regime in Tehran, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
This form of velayat-e faqih, this fundamentalist vision of ruling the state in the absence of the 12th Imam, which is the Imamate ideology, which is in place in Iran. It's difficult to find anything much more hawkish, given their views and given the pressures in Iran for economic opportunities. Then I think that if this government were to collapse, it would be pushing in that type of direction rather than going more conservative.
Oh well, that's very interesting. You should. Well, I mean, that in a way is a sign of optimism. Well, for us who would tend to think that we'd rather have a less hawkish regime in Tehran.
Of course, but the negative is that a lot of people will suffer massively for that to happen, and people will die.
But the logic of
In
somebody
order for
like
that to
Trump
happen.
and Netanyahu would be that if the outcome is one of greater stability in the region, then it's not their fault that people are so wrong-headed that they're behaving in such a way which is producing the need for sanctions. That's not on the conscience of the West. And if the outcome eventually, if they have to taste some very unpalatable medicine on the road to a more sensible situation, so be it. The main thing is to get a more sensible situation. That's interesting. It's not an angle I usually, because you tend to hear that the regime in Tehran would be under pressure to move further. I mean, move more active rather than just being hawkish.
Though, when talking about the regime in Tehran, we need to separate Rouhani from the regime. I'm talking about the regime as a whole.
Yeah,
Rouhani operates.
But he is a kind of a break on, isn't he? Or
not really.
Maybe not.
He's not the final arbiter of power. The regime, Velayati Fakhi, the supreme leader. That's where the power really lies. Rouhani operates within the parameters set by the supreme leader and the structure of government that regulates activity there.
Right.
Those parameters are clearly set. Rouhani may push against them, but he operates in a way that his political agency is tolerated, accepted. Yeah. He was allowed to run in the elections for president. He was vetted and he was allowed to run because he could be trusted to work within these parameters. If he was a true radical anarchist who wanted to overthrow the system and work in a completely different way, he wouldn't have been allowed to stand.
Yeah.
So I think that's how we need to view regime politics and regime political structures in Iran.
But you see what you just said, rather contrary to your usual form, it's actually suggesting that Mr. Trump, there's method in his madness.
I just find
here, as in North Korea, the Nobel Prize beckons, so the Nobel Committee should be immediately contacting him.
I see what you're saying. I just think that right now what's happening is there is more instability being created.
But again, the instability could be
a precursor,
preferable to what is really a kind of a Cold War, or even certainly a region where proxy wars, etc., are becoming more and more bloody and frequent.
Sure. I mean, there's no doubt that what Iran is doing in Syria is abhorrent. Iran is supporting the regime of Bashar al-Assad, and that is a genocidal regime that has killed 500,000 people. That is disgusting, that is abhorrent and should not be tolerated. But more instability, more uncertainty, potentially Iran lashing out, destabilizing the region further, creating more and more displaced peoples. It's speculation, but that is surely not a desired outcome.
Well, it's certainly very interesting that there's more justification for Mr. Trump's position than I imagined in that context. But gradually you're warming to him. I can tell.
Certainly am.
And
we're running out of time.
Well, we're not running out of time. We're going to talk about other things.
We need to talk about other things.
Right. Go on then. Are we going to talk about Brexit?
We should talk about Brexit.
Well, it's just the same old thing, isn't it, really? But anyway, very quickly, I mean, it seems at the moment that the government has been canvassing various alternatives, and they've been told really quite clearly, I think, that these alternatives are problematic from the EU's point of view, as well as being internally divisive. And now it's, it is looking increasingly as if there won't be a deal at the end of it, it seems to me.
But hang on, we can have a Norwegian-style deal.
Well, but you've just told me, thanks to your telephone, that Mr. Corbyn has said that wouldn't be a good idea. And the thing is that any kind of moderate compromise will require the full support of the Labour Party, because since the Conservative Party is now UKIP, with a few dissidents remaining, then the only hope is finding some kind of solution which will have the support of the SNP, Labour, Liberal Democrats, and a sizable chunk of remaining
but what might that look like?
Conservatives. Well, I've always thought that the reality would end up that we would have, I think we said this last week, that we'd be tied economically to the EU in such a way that made very little difference compared to our previous situation, but that we wouldn't be part of the decision-making apparatus anymore. And that would be a kind of Norway situation. The ones that, all these bespoke deals that people have spoken about rest on a mistaken assumption about the balance of economic advantage for the EU and for Britain. So yeah, I mean it's. I hope that gradually people are getting a dose of reality on this. That the choice was between remaining in an extremely unsatisfactory and irritating institution or being poorer.
Right.
And in either instance, we would still, as a country, be forced to take decisions which, in the end, were not of our own making, because of either being part of a formal mechanism of the EU or being forced by developments outside Britain to adopt certain policies.
So those people who say that they wanted to leave Europe, the EU, because they wanted to get their sovereignty back, are going to find out that sovereignty can be lost in myriad ways.
Well, I think we've spoken about this before, that the first thing one would say would be, can you define sovereignty? And they would come back with it's the ability to take our own decisions. But then the next question is, what do you mean by your own decisions?
Yeah.
And when you look at that, as we've said before, no country has sovereignty, not even China has. Although it may come closer than other countries, certainly the US doesn't have. The very interesting thing, our Nobel laureate Mr. Trump the other day suddenly saying that Chinese jobs are really important. Did you notice that? Yeah. And what's happening, it seems, is that, of course, China has played a very constructive part over North Korea. The full story isn't yet out, but I imagine that that's happened. And Mr. Trump is getting closer to China, which is very wise from his point of view for an awful lot of reasons. But he wouldn't have said a thing like that had it not been for the fact that he needs China's goodwill in other respects. So the US isn't sovereign. If the US isn't sovereign, then the UK isn't sovereign. And then you come up with a different definition of sovereignty, which is the ability to take decisions in a constraining context, but the ability to take decisions which actually advance the interests of your state.
Sure.
That's the only viable meaning of sovereignty. And the danger is, if you become isolated, you perhaps have a series of unpalatable choices, that you don't anymore have the ability to take decisions which are in the advantage of your state, because you just don't have the muscle to make those decisions effective.
And the irony of it all is, of course, that at one point you did have that capacity to shape, if not to take, but to shape, but gave it up in search of this veneer, this construction.
Except for the thing is that because nobody's ever really had a proper understanding of sovereignty, and it was always, even the pro-European prime ministers ended up saying, it's us against them, we've thrashed out a deal against them, that the only way in which that definition of sovereignty works in relation to the EU is if you regard yourselves in a bartering, negotiating position with partners. That's the context in which you can facilitate decisions which are in your interest. But if you're alienating your partners all the time by saying it's us against them, then you'll bring about the situation that you're depicting. They will be against you because they dislike so much the way that you treat the game. So you could say that being in the EU and being awkward was in fact a way to lose your sovereignty. This new definition about making effective decisions, because Britain wasn't very often getting its way. It wasn't playing the game properly.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with pretty much all of that.
Well, of course.
I'm currently writing a book on sovereignty, so this is a discussion for another time, another place, rather than going down that rabbit hole.
You'll find that the best word on this was Geoffrey Howe, the now late lamented Geoffrey Howe, as Foreign Secretary, wrote an article for a journal depicting, putting forward the old view of sovereignty and saying that's just meaningless now, and saying that sovereignty is more this kind of looking after your own interests within a very unhelpful context usually. So you should consult
I'll have a
Geoffrey
look.
Howe.
And the counter example, and I'm a big fan of his work, is to look at someone like Giorgio Agamben, who is an Italian continental philosopher who looks at power as the relational, and looks at how sovereignty is the decision to define the exception.
Well, in a nutshell, that's the kind of thing that the average person would be thinking. When
I think so. I think so.
Yeah, it's suitably abstract that you can make it mean whatever you want.
I certainly have done.
Yeah,
I
good.
certainly
So
have.
now we haven't got any Arsenal. Well, Arsenal, a big send-off to Mr. Wenger.
Yes.
And of course, Mr. Benitez walks on water. 3-0 victor over
He walks on up the
Chelsea.
Thames.
Well, it's quite possible. But and what are in other sporting news? No, none. I don't think.
World Cup squad. Announced tomorrow.
Oh right, yeah.
Do we care?
Oh, you don't.
No.
Because no, Theo Walcott won't be in it this time. Much to your chagrin. In fact, probably the number of Arsenal players, Wilshere might be there as
He might be.
because they need somebody to make the tea.
Or to put out the cones.
Yeah, or somebody to give the medical staff something to do.
Yeah.
He's a useful player from that point
I
of
can
view.
see that. Yep.
Yeah.
So no, we don't care about that.
No.
Cricket season.
Lancashire won the other day. Yes. But they've lost a lot of other games. Boo. Don't really care can't get too excited. It's not the same, is it? It's not like the days of 5-day,
I missed the 5-dayers.
Yeah, although
Their comeback.
Ireland have got,
that
Ireland
was very
playing,
exciting.
yeah, it's a very interesting match, yeah. Yeah, so, and Book of the Week,
Book
go
of
on
the week.
quickly.
Yeah. So I'm very sad
quickly.
that I took this home to use it, but I will send in a photo. Yay big. Very
Excellent.
small book. A book that I bought on Abe Books.
Yeah,
Other stores are
are
available.
available.
Take your pick. And it was a book that looks at the interwar period from a sort of international politics, Mandate era, Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Sèvres, things like that, San Remo, Sykes-Picot, all of those meaty topics.
Yeah, the Hall-Laval Pact.
Indeed.
Or,
And this was a book that I bought from Abe.
yeah, with
that
your own
was
money.
With my own money, that was originally...
Well, you looked inside to see who the previous owner had been, and it was Lancaster University
was
Library. Imagine my surprise. So, I think you should sue Lancaster University Library, because at one point you would have been able to take that book out without payment as a member of the university. So you're now having to buy something which was previously...
I'll check to make sure that's not available online first.
Right. Aha. But anyway, it's interesting. I mean, it is a sad thing that university libraries do find it necessary to discard stock, but it is an improvement on them just throwing it all in a tip.
Yes. And there are stories of academics who were spotted scurrying around in those skips.
A skip rather than a tip.
And that could well have been a tip.
Yeah, well,
as well.
no, I did have a little browse. Yeah, no, it's very sad. But then, as Milton said, rather kill a man than kill a good book. He who kills a book, is a murderer.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And on that note,
He should have said kill a person. Oh, the royal wedding! Everyone's excited. Not.
Tumbleweed.
Yeah. Okay. God bless him. By the next episode, episode 17. The big
Man
day will
will
have happened.
have
The
married
world
woman.
will have changed forever.
Woman
and
will have married man.
yeah. Good luck to
Wonderful.
them. Good luck. I think this program extends because they'll be watching, and obviously, if they can't contact us directly, they'll be watching this, and I think we hope that they have a long and happy existence.
Indeed.
And with that, like us, do all the other things that people do on social media. And let's hope next week we have slightly less sombre things to talk
Yeah,
about, but that
slightly
never
cheerier.
seems to be the case.
But we will do a review of the royal wedding. We'll have Mark Lacey come in and talk about what Meghan was wearing.
It can only be hoped. Our fashion correspondent.
And it's goodbye from me.
Yeah, and me, and Roz.